Hello everybody and welcome back to the damn podcast channel. But today we are actually at the damn sofa doing the damn podcast channel. Simply because I did not have time to switch my sets around. I have lots of work coming up the rest of this week and I desperately wanted to come talk about these two major updates. So if you are watching this, make sure you check out the links down below. I have the links to both of my channels. The podcast channel, which is where we do stuff like this and go live randomly. And then my main channel, which is where we, do the deeper dives, that kind of stuff. So if you like the vibe, make sure to subscribe. Now today you saw the thumbnail, you know what we're talking about, hopefully. We're going to be talking about two updates. One with Sherri Papini and another one with Adnan Syed. I say his name wrong sometimes, so I apologize. So we're going to be going over those two things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to review some articles, two of them, one about each, and at the end of that I will offer my opinions on both of them. So let's go ahead and jump right on in, starting with Sherri Papini. Now the name of this article is "She Faked Her Kidnapping to Go Back to Her Ex, Now She'll Get 18 Months in Prison." This is on NPR. It says the Associated Press. I'm not seeing a specific author by this. This was September 20th, 2022, 1:45 p.m. And so I'm just going to go through this very quickly. A Northern California mother of two was sentenced Monday to 18 months in prison for faking her own kidnapping so she could go back to a former boyfriend, which led to a 3-week multi-state search before she resurfaced on Thanksgiving Day in 2016. She did plead guilty last spring to staging the abduction and lying to the FBI about it. As part of the plea bargain, she is required to pay more than $300,000 in restitution. Oh my God. Probation officers and Papini's attorney had recommended that she spend a month in custody and 7 months in supervised home detention, while prosecutors wanted her to serve the 8 months behind bars. But senior U.S. District Judge William Shube said he opted for an 18-month sentence in order to deter others. The judge said he considered the seriousness of the offense and the sheer number of people who were impacted, which included law enforcement officers, the community, two Hispanic, about the whole story about being, kidnapped by two Hispanic women, and how that led to the Latino community that was falsely viewed with suspicion, so on and so forth. He said the nation is watching. Shube said, paraphrasing prosecutors' argument in a court filing, "They need to be sent the right message. We have to make sure that crime doesn't pay." Now, Papini quietly answered, "Yes, sir," when the judge asked if she understood the sentence. She didn't speak to reporters as she was surrounded by more than a dozen supporters outside the courtroom, some of whom hugged her tightly. They included her husband's sister, with whom she has been living since she split with her husband, who filed for divorce and sought custody of their children after she pleaded guilty. Speaking briefly outside of the courthouse after the hearing, defense attorney William Portanova called it a fair sentence even though it's longer than we wished. The client was ordered to report to federal prison on November 8th. Shube ordered her to serve 36 months of supervision after her release, a year longer than probation officers had sought. The twin charges carried a maximum possible sentence of 25 years in prison. And I'm just going to quote what the attorney said. "Obviously, the court did what it thought was right, and frankly, it's difficult to argue with the justice of the sentence," Portanova said. "I'm not really surprised because I understand the court's analysis. To the extent the judge wanted to underline the wrongness of her actions and tattoo it further on her soul, he accomplished that for sure." Papini has never given a rational explanation for her behavior, which included months of careful planning before she disappeared and temporarily abandoned her children, who are most precious to her, Portanova said. Her actions stumped even independent mental health experts who said they didn't conform with any typical diagnosis. Portanova blamed it on what sounds like a fierce storm that was going on for a long time inside her head, but said now she is a changed woman. Papini offered no explanation during her brief, tearful comments to the judge before she was sentenced. "I'm so sorry to the many people who have suffered because of me," she said. "I am guilty, Your Honor. I am guilty of lying. I am guilty of dishonor," she said. "What is done cannot be undone. It cannot be erased." But both the judge and the assistant U.S. Attorney Veronica Alegria said her comments were simply more manipulation. At this point, she would say and do anything to mitigate her punishment, Alegria told Shube. "This case is serious and there have been very real harms to society. There's a community that lived in fear. Ms. Papini took money from real victims," Alegria said. "Victims of crimes may not believe they will be believed by law enforcement because of this hoax." "Ms. Papini is a manipulator," Shube said. "It's not as if Ms. Papini has seen the error of her ways. If she had not been caught, she'd still be living the lie." Portanova said in a pre-sentence court filing that Papini was in pursuit of a nonsensical fantasy when she fled to a former boyfriend in Southern California. He dropped her off along I-5 about 150 miles from her home after she said she wanted to go home. Now it just goes into some of the backstory of the case and things of this nature and what she's done here. I'm going to skip down to the bottom here. As part of the plea agreement, she has agreed to reimburse law enforcement agencies more than $150,000 for the cost of the search and for her non-existent kidnappers, and repay the $128,000 she received in disability payments since her return. But she said she is unlikely to ever be able to repay the money unless she wins the lottery. Wow. I've got a lot to say about that one, but let's switch over to this other piping hot one. So let's jump over to that one. This is about Adnan Syed. The name of this article is from the Baltimore Sun. It says, Adnan Syed walks out of Baltimore courthouse after judge overturns his 2000 murder conviction. This is by Alex Mann and Lee O. Sanderlin. It was published on September 20th, 2022 at 8:40 a.m. Adnan Syed, the man whose legal saga spawned the hit podcast Serial, walked away from a Baltimore courthouse Monday free of shackles after 23 years. Baltimore Circuit Judge Melissa Finn overturned his murder conviction in the 1999 killing of Hae-Min Lee after prosecutors raised doubts about his guilty finding because of the revelation of alternative suspects in the homicide and unreliable evidence used against him at trial. Saying her ruling was in the interest of justice and fairness, Finn ordered Syed placed on home detention wearing a GPS monitor while Baltimore State Attorney Marilyn Mosby's office chooses whether to drop his charges or to try him again for taking the life of his ex-girlfriend. Prosecutors have 30 days to make the decision. Dressed in a white shirt and black tie, he smiled while descending the courthouse steps to the raucous cheers of supporters, family, and friends. He did not speak to reporters on his way out of the court, but his attorney, Erica Suter, recalled her client, telling her he couldn't believe it's real after Finn's ruling. Prosecutors said a year-long investigation conducted alongside Suter showed that authorities knew about at least one alternative suspect before his trial and withheld that information from his defense, committing what's known as a Brady violation. While Mosby would not commit Monday to dismissing the case, she conceded much of the evidence relied upon in the original trial was now useless. Regardless of the decision, Mosby said Monday's outcome reflected her office's commitment to an equitable justice system. I said this 4 months following the death of Freddie Gray, and I'm saying it 4 months before the end of my term. Justice is always worth the price paid for its pursuit, Mosby said. But Maryland Attorney General Brian Frosch, whose office represented the state for Syed's various appeals, released a statement after Finn's ruling saying there was not a Brady violation and there were other serious problems with Mosby's office motion. But the statement did not elaborate. Neither state's attorney Mosby nor anyone from her office bothered to consult with either the assistant state's attorney who prosecuted the case or with anyone in my office regarding these alleged violations. The file in this case was made available on several occasions to the defense. Lee, 18, and so this just goes into a little bit of the backstory, but I'm going to go through this one here a little bit just because this might be one that people aren't familiar with or they haven't read through it in a while. Lee, 18, was strangled to death and buried in a clandestine grave in Leakin Park. Authorities at the time said they suspected that Syed, her ex-boyfriend, struggled with her in a car before killing her. The state's theory was that the popular honor student at Woodland High School couldn't handle it when Lee broke up with him. He was 17 at the time of the arrest and has been behind bars ever since. Syed, now 41, has always maintained his innocence. Suter declared her client innocent in court and decreed prosecutors for withholding evidence that could have proved as much for decades. If that evidence had been disclosed, perhaps Adnan would not have missed his high school graduation or his pre-med exams or 23 years of birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, community events, and everyday moments of joy. In court, Syed was stoic when Finn ruled. His family members gasped, embraced, and wept. The audience gallery erupted when the judge adjourned court. Allowed to speak before the attorneys, young Lee said he felt blindsided and betrayed by the prosecution's decision to seek to vacate Syed's conviction. He choked up as he spoke to the judge. "This is not a podcast for me. This is real life," young Lee told Finn. Lee said he represents the criminal justice system, but described his and his relatives' enduring grief. He said he's not against continued investigation, but that Syed's conviction should stand. Every day when I think it's over, it always comes back, he said. It's killing me. Assistant State's Attorney Becky Feldman said in court that the prosecutor's decision on how to proceed with Syed's case hinges on an ongoing investigation focused on the alternative suspects. Baltimore police have reopened their probe into Lee's homicide, and Feldman promised her office would allocate all the resources it could. We need to make sure we hold the correct person accountable, said Feldman, chief of the office's sentencing review unit. Syed's first trial in 1999 ended with a mistrial. In 2000, a jury found him guilty. The judge handed down life plus 30 years in prison at sentencing. Despite fighting to uphold the conviction in the years past, prosecutors now say Syed may not be Lee's killer. Prosecutors have known since 1999 of 2 alternative suspects who may have killed Lee, according to their motion to overturn his conviction. One of the suspects had threatened her, saying he would make her disappear. He would kill her, prosecutors wrote. Prosecutors said the state did not disclose the alternative suspects to Syed's defense before trial, meaning his attorneys couldn't use that information to argue his innocence to a jury. Prosecutors described one of the suspects as a serial person who does R to women, saying the suspect was convicted in a series of SAs after Syed's trial. Police discovered Lee's car near the residence of one of the alternative suspects, the state's motion said. Syed was convicted in part because of cell phone location data that has since been found to be unreliable, according to prosecutors. They also highlighted the inconsistent statements of his co-defendant Jay Wilds, who testified against him. Mr. Syed's conviction was built on flawed investigation, Souter said in court. This was true in 1999 when he was a 17-year-old child. It remains true today. Despite the developments, prosecutors say they are not prepared to declare him innocent. The courts turned down all of his appeals, the most recent in 2019 when the Supreme Court declined to hear his case. Things were quiet until the spring. Behind the scenes, Souter, a public defender and director of the Innocence Project Clinic at the University of Baltimore School of Law, have been working with Mosby's office with hopes of reducing Syed's prison term in light of a new state law enabling those convicted of crimes before they turn 18 to ask the court to modify their punishment. While examining the case, prosecutors agreed to request new DNA testing for items collected as evidence of Lee's killing. Fenn ordered the test in March, but the results have so far been inconclusive, court documents show. Tests for a few of the items are pending, said Mosby. And Mosby said after court, the office was waiting on those results before deciding whether to drop Syed's charges. Okay, so that's that article. Let's start with that one and talk about that. So first things first, I remember when Serial came out. To me and for me, Serial was one of the big launches into going into true crime this deep, like where you got really all up in it with a case like this. And so this was one of those. So I always thought this was going to be one of those cases that, you know, just kind of like what we see with Stephen Avery, one of those type situations of, you know, things keep coming up with it, they keep going through the thing, but, you know, nothing really budges with it. So I'm very shocked to see this happen. Okay, so on that note, rereading this, it has been a long time since I've followed this deep. So I remember when I watched or listened to Serial, and 100% I was like, oh, he's innocent, there's that. But if you remember in Serial, there was like that room of like, you know, because she did the whole thing of like going through the motions and all this type stuff. The key things that they hit on here were 3 things that I immediately reading this, I was like, yes, I remember this. Jay's testimony. The cell phone data, the alternative suspects, these kind of things where I'm like, yeah, 100%. This was like shaky then, and obviously it's been proven where it's like, yeah, you can't rely on this. Like I don't remember the details to it right now, but like the cell phone data and the pings and stuff like that, it was like, no, you can't trust that. Jay's back and forth and this and that and testifying against him, completely unreliable witness. So there was a lot of stuff going on with that there. So my personal 2 cents on this one, I do not think they will pursue charges with it. I would be shocked if they completely drop the charges, because this could be a huge, like, he's going to come back and sue us. So I think it's going to be, we're going to see some courtroom battles with this. I do not imagine that they're going to press charges again. And if that DNA stuff comes back, and I'm not sure what exactly they've tested, but especially if that comes back and further exonerates him, then, you know, 100% they're going to be like, ugh. But they might try and will and deal and be like, well, let's do time served, or let's do this, or let's do that. It'll be very interesting to see what they do. I just don't see them retrying him for this specific thing. I can understand where Lee's parents, young young Lee, siblings, against her family. My heart goes out to her family because at the end of the day, whether it was Adnan, whether it was someone else, whatever, someone is getting away with that crime. You know what I'm saying? Someone has been walking the streets while an innocent person has been behind bars. They got away with that. And so I understand that from their perspective, they're like, you know what, we feel like he did it, you know, okay. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay. Maybe they can sit here and look at some of the stuff that the state's coming up with and saying, well, here's A, B, and C. Or even if the state says, you know what, actually, we've redone this stuff and we found out who really did it. You know, but at the end of the day, my heart just breaks for them because anyone who loses a child, I mean, it's awful, right? And the courtroom battles that ensue and all this kind of stuff, it's absolutely terrible for them to go through, and my heart aches for them. I cannot imagine. So we're gonna hang by and just watch and see what comes of this one. Now, also on that note, let's talk about little Miss Sherri Papini real quick. Okay, now if you saw my community post or whatever, I was like, glad she got more time, because if you remember, they were going to really give her a very light sentence. Like that original thing that the state was like, well, we suggest this, like 30 days behind bars and all this stuff. I was like, are you kidding me? For what she did? Are you serious? I thought she was going away for decades, right? I still feel that she should, okay? For what she did, even this little 18-month sentence and the probation and the $300,000, I'm like, this is not near enough, right? The level of victimization that she has done to so many people, and I 100% agree with the judge, she's only sorry she got caught. Y'all, these issues she's got are deep, okay? They ain't going nowhere. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, these are very deep issues. The trauma she put, just start with her children and husband through. Then you outreach the community, things she's done to victims, things she's done to the Latino community. I mean, it's bad, okay? So the fact that she's getting away with this, 18 months, is a joke. But it's better than what she was gonna get, you know what I mean? Now, also on that note, I'm shocked with the $300,000, right? The judge is right, she'll never be able to repay that. So, I mean, I was like, okay, good. Like, this is a good thing. So I'm shocked in like a good way, right? So that part to it, I didn't expect the money part. I expected her to kind of get this little sentence and then go in and do her thing and touch the jail. That being said, do I think she's going to do a long time in prison? Absolutely not. She's going to go touch the floor and leave. Before, she was probably going to spend a day, right? Now she might spend an actual month. You know what I'm saying? Because you know how the prisons are out there. They're so overcrowded. And if you're like not violent, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, like you just go and you don't spend very much time and then they throw you back out. I'm also glad that they gave her 36 months probation because remember, she has to adhere to all these rules. So it'll be very interesting. Another thing I found interesting about that article is when it says she's staying with her husband's sister. Like, I wonder how that dynamic plays out, right? Because he's in the middle of divorcing her and trying to get the custody. And maybe they were like, well, look, she has nowhere to go. It's my kid's mother. I don't want to just throw her out in the streets. But, you know, I'm curious if that was the train of thought. I'm not saying that's what he said. So I still have lots more questions about that. I'm very interested to see how much time she actually does. And isn't this always funny with crimes like this where you see them and they're like, go report by November 5th. Yet then you see all these other people who are yanked up off the streets for like way lesser stuff in the middle of their day or whatever. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be arrested if they're doing something wrong. You know what I mean? I get that. But it's just funny how this little tap on the wrist for these little federal things, you just go get your life settled going on November 5th. And I'm like, that's so cushy, right? I mean, it just kind of blows my mind. So between that and Adnan Syed, I'm just like, I mean, my God, my computer was melting down, y'all. So anyways, let me know what y'all think. Again, the Adnan Syed is such a, hot topic, obviously, but I mean, one of those polarizing things that went around the internet for a while of, is he guilty? Is he not guilty? You know, that kind of a thing. So I'm curious to see what y'all think. And may justice prevail in all of these cases. So thank you for sitting here watching. I really appreciate it. And until the next time we gather around that damn computer and this damn sofa, I'll see y'all soon.